I've always loved small-town festivals. There's something comforting about the familiar faces, the smell of funnel cake, and the sound of children laughing on carnival rides. But what happened to me at the Riverside County Fair on September 19, 2023, changed how I see crowds forever. What started as a perfect evening with my girlfriend Emma turned into a nightmare that made me realize how vulnerable we all are, even in the most public places. Emma and I had been dating for about 8 months, and she'd been wanting to go to the fair since the posters went up around town. I work as a quality control inspector at Pacific Industries, so I don't get out much during the week. Saturday night seemed perfect, cool September air, clear skies, and the fair was only 20 minutes from our apartment on Cedar Lane. We arrived around 7:30, just as the sun was setting and the carnival lights were starting to create that magical glow. Emma immediately wanted to try the ring toss. She's competitive about the weirdest things. I was standing behind her, watching her concentration face, when I first noticed him. He was maybe 40 feet away, leaning against the funnel cake stand. Average height, probably mid-30s, wearing a dark blue baseball cap and a gray hoodie. What caught my attention wasn't his appearance, it was the way he was staring directly at Emma. Not the casual glance you might give an attractive woman, but an intense, focused stare that made my stomach tighten. I moved slightly to block his view and whispered to Emma that we should check out the ring toss booth on the other side of the midway. She won a small stuffed elephant, I still have it, and we walked toward the Ferris wheel. I glanced back casually, and my heart sank. The man in the gray hoodie was following us, maintaining the same distance. "Everything okay?" Emma asked, noticing I kept looking around. "Yeah, just checking out all the booths," I lied. I didn't want to worry her, and honestly, I was hoping I was being paranoid. We got in line for the Ferris wheel, and I positioned myself so I could watch the crowd. The man was there, pretending to read a flyer about the pie-eating contest, but his eyes kept darting to Emma. When we moved, he moved. When we stopped, he found a new position to watch from. The Ferris wheel gave me a better view of the entire fairgrounds. As we reached the top, I scanned the area below. The man was standing near the base of the ride, looking up at our car. The carnival lights illuminated his face clearly for the first time, and what I saw made my blood run cold. He wasn't just watching Emma, he was studying her, memorizing her, with an expression I can only describe as predatory hunger. "Emma," I said quietly, "when we get off this ride, I want you to stay close to me. Don't ask questions right now, but there's someone who's been following us." Her face went pale. "Following us? Are you sure?" "Unfortunately, yes. We're going to walk toward the security booth near the entrance, but act normal." As we descended, I could see the man repositioning himself near the ride exit. When we got off, I took Emma's hand firmly and started walking toward the main entrance where I'd seen a security guard earlier. Behind us, I could hear his footsteps matching our pace. "He's still following us, isn't he?" Emma whispered. "Don't look back. Just keep walking." We reached the security booth, but it was empty. A handwritten sign said, "Back in 15 minutes." My mind raced. The parking lot was a quarter-mile away, mostly unlit, and I could hear our followers' footsteps getting closer. That's when I heard him speak for the first time. "Excuse me," he called out. "Hey, excuse me." We kept walking, but he started moving faster. Emma's grip on my hand tightened. "I said excuse me." His voice was louder, with an edge that made other fairgoers turn to look. I stopped and turned around, keeping Emma behind me. "Can I help you?" Up close, he was even more unsettling. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had the nervous energy of someone on stimulants. He was holding a piece of paper in his shaking hand. "Your girlfriend," he said, staring past me at Emma. "She looks exactly like someone I know. Can I ask her something?" "No," I said firmly. "We're leaving. It'll just take a second. I just want to know if she's ever lived in Bakersfield. Or maybe she has a sister who—" "We're not interested in talking," I interrupted, turning to guide Emma away. That's when he grabbed my shoulder. "I'm trying to be polite here," he said, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a threat. I just want to talk to her for a minute. I spun around and knocked his hand away. Don't touch me. We don't know you, and we don't want to talk to you. For a moment, I thought he might back down. Then I saw his expression change completely. The fake politeness disappeared, replaced by rage. You don't understand, he hissed. I've been looking for her for a long time. I know it's her. Emma stepped out from behind me. I've never seen you before in my life. Leave us alone. Liar, he spat. You think you can just disappear? Change your hair, move to a different town. I found you once, I'll find you again. That's when I realized we were dealing with someone genuinely dangerous. This wasn't random. He thought Emma was someone else, someone he'd been searching for. And he wasn't going to be convinced otherwise. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. He laughed. Go ahead. By the time they get here, we'll have had our conversation. I dialed 911, but he was right, we were at least 15 minutes from the nearest police station. Emma and I started walking quickly toward the parking lot, but he followed, no longer trying to hide his intentions. You can't run from me again, Sarah, he called after us. I know what you did, and you're going to pay for it. My name isn't Sarah, Emma shouted back. Stop lying, he screamed, loud enough that other fairgoers were starting to stare. We reached the edge of the parking lot, but our car was still hundreds of yards away in the dark. I could hear him gaining on us, and I made a decision that probably saved our lives. Instead of heading to our car, I ran toward the bright lights of the gas station across the street, pulling Emma with me. The gas station was busy, with families loading up on snacks after the fair. We rushed inside, and I quickly explained the situation to the clerk, a teenager who looked terrified but immediately locked the front door and called for his manager. Through the window, we could see our stalker pacing back and forth in the parking lot, occasionally shouting something we couldn't hear. He stayed there for almost 20 minutes before the police arrived. When Officer Martinez interviewed us, he asked Emma if she'd ever heard the name Sarah Mitchell. She hadn't. He told us that our stalker, whose name was Derek Hansen, had been looking for his ex-girlfriend Sarah Mitchell for over 2 years. Sarah had filed multiple restraining orders against him before disappearing completely. The scary thing, Officer Martinez said, is that your girlfriend does look remarkably similar to Sarah. Same height, same hair color, similar facial structure. In his mind, there's no doubt she's the woman he's been hunting. Derek was arrested that night for stalking and harassment, but the officer warned us that he'd probably make bail within a few days. He suggested we vary our routines and consider staying somewhere else for a while. We followed his advice. Emma stayed with her sister in Fresno for 2 weeks while I worked with the police to document everything. During that time, we learned more about Derek Hansen's history. He'd been stalking Sarah Mitchell since their breakup 3 years earlier. She'd moved 4 times, changed jobs twice, and finally disappeared completely after he showed up at her workplace with a knife. The police never found Sarah Mitchell. They don't know if she's in hiding, if she left the state, or if something worse happened to her. What they do know is that Derek had been systematically searching for her, traveling to different towns whenever he heard about a woman matching her description. Emma and I are together now, but that night changed both of us. We're constantly aware of our surroundings, we avoid crowded events, and Emma never goes anywhere alone after dark. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, Derek Hansen is still looking for Sarah Mitchell, and the next woman who happens to look like her might not be as lucky as we were. The case detective told us something that still haunts me. Most stalkers are hunting someone specific, but sometimes they'll transfer their obsession to someone new if they can't find their original target. You just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, looking like the wrong person. We never went back to another carnival. Every time I see those bright lights and hear that music, I remember the feeling of being hunted, of realizing that a perfect stranger was willing to hurt us because of something that existed only in his disturbed mind. The scariest part? The police told us that Derek Hansen was released on bail 3 days after his arrest. He violated his bail conditions by leaving the county, and there's currently a warrant out for his arrest. Officer Martinez calls me every few months to check in, but Derek Hansen is still out there, still looking for Sarah Mitchell. Or someone who looks like her. Let me ask you something, have you ever felt like someone was watching you in a crowd? Have you ever had that feeling that you were being followed, but told yourself you were just being paranoid? Because I used to think that too. Now I know that sometimes, that feeling is trying to save your life. What I didn't know that night was that my coworker at Pacific Industries had experienced something remarkably similar just 2 weeks earlier. And what we discovered when we compared our stories revealed a pattern that the police had missed completely. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I'm a 27-year-old software engineer for Mountain View Technologies here in Oakwood. I've always been the logical type. Everything has an explanation, every problem has a solution, every mystery can be solved with enough data. But what happened to me at the Oakwood Fall Festival on October 14, 2023, shattered my belief that the world operates on predictable patterns. What started as a relaxing Saturday evening turned into a psychological nightmare that made me realize I was being hunted by people who knew far more about me than I knew about them. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for the past month, debugging a client management system that seemed determined to crash every time we pushed an update to production. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, had practically ordered me to take the weekend off. "Marcus, you're burning out," she'd said Friday afternoon. "Go to that carnival you've been talking about. Have some fun. The code will still be broken on Monday." The Oakwood Fall Festival was one of those small-town events that tries to recapture some Norman Rockwell version of America. Local vendors, carnival rides operated by teenagers, and the kind of community spirit that exists more in nostalgia than reality. But I'd grown up in Oakwood, and the festival reminded me of simpler times when my biggest worry was whether I'd have enough tickets for the tilt-a-whirl. I arrived around 7 p.m., just as the lights were coming on and families were starting to gather for the evening activities. The weather was perfect, cool October air with that hint of wood smoke that makes autumn feel magical. I bought a funnel cake and was walking toward the game booths when I saw the first note. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my 2020 Honda Civic, folded into a neat square. My car was parked in the grass lot behind the Methodist church, along with about 50 other vehicles. At first, I assumed it was some kind of festival flyer or maybe someone leaving their contact information after a minor parking lot incident. The note was handwritten in block letters on plain white paper. "We've been watching you, Marcus. Your routine is very predictable." My first instinct was to look around for someone playing a prank. My coworkers at Mountain View had a history of elaborate jokes, and this seemed like something they'd think was hilarious. But none of them knew I was coming to the carnival, and how would they know which car was mine? I folded the note and put it in my pocket, telling myself it was probably a case of mistaken identity. There had to be other people named Marcus at the festival. But as I walked back toward the midway, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The carnival had gotten more crowded in the 15 minutes I'd been gone. Families with small children, teenagers on dates, elderly couples sharing elephant ears. Normal people having normal fun. But now every person in my peripheral vision seemed potentially threatening. I was standing in line for the haunted house when I found the second note. It was pinned to the bulletin board next to the ticket booth, right at eye level. Another piece of white paper, same block lettering. "You left your apartment at 6:47 p.m. You stopped for gas at the Shell station on Elm Street. You paid with your Visa card ending in 3847. My blood went cold. Every detail was accurate. I had left at 6:47 p.m. I remembered checking my phone. I had stopped at the Shell station, and I had used my Visa card. Someone had not only been watching me, they'd been following me closely enough to know specific details about my evening. I looked around frantically, trying to spot anyone who seemed out of place or too interested in my reaction. The line for the haunted house was full of teenagers and young couples, all focused on their own conversations. But somewhere in this crowd was someone who had been tracking my movements. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Kevin, who lives 2 blocks from my apartment complex on Willow Court. "Hey Marcus, what's up?" Kevin, this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to drive by my apartment and see if anyone's hanging around. Like watching my building or sitting in a car that doesn't belong. Dude, are you okay? You sound freaked out. I explained about the notes, reading them word for word. Kevin agreed to check on my apartment, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting. It's probably just some kids messing around, he said. You know how weird people get around Halloween. While I waited for Kevin to call back, I decided to test the theory. I walked deliberately to 3 different locations within the carnival: the ring toss, the cotton candy stand, and the beer garden. At each stop, I looked carefully for anyone who might be following me or paying unusual attention to my movements. 20 minutes later, Kevin called back. Marcus, there's a dark blue Ford Explorer parked across from your building. Tennessee plates, 2 people inside. They've been there the whole time I was watching. Tennessee plates? I don't know anyone from Tennessee. Neither do I. And here's the weird part: when I drove by the second time, the passenger took my picture with a telephoto lens. Now I was genuinely scared. This wasn't a prank or a case of mistaken identity. Someone was conducting organized surveillance on me, both at the carnival and at my home. But why? I was walking toward the exit, planning to leave immediately, when I found the 3rd note. This one was taped to the side of the funnel cake trailer, right where I bought my food earlier. Same paper, same handwriting. Don't leave yet, Marcus. We need to talk. Check your car. My hands were shaking as I read it. They knew I was planning to leave. They'd been watching me closely enough to predict my movements and place a note exactly where they knew I'd see it. I had a choice: go to my car and find out what they wanted, or call the police and hope they could respond before whoever was watching me disappeared. I chose the 3rd option. I called 911 while walking toward my car, keeping the dispatcher on the line. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marcus Rodriguez. I'm at the Oakwood Fall Festival, and someone has been leaving threatening notes for me and following me. They know personal details about my routine and have people watching my apartment. The dispatcher took my information and said an officer would be there within 10 minutes. I stayed on the line as I approached my car, describing everything I saw to create a record of whatever was about to happen. There was another note under my windshield wiper, but this one was different. Thicker paper, like cardstock, and instead of being handwritten, it was printed from a computer. It contained a photograph. The photograph was of me, taken through my apartment window. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, working on code. The angle suggested it had been taken from the parking lot behind my building. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written, "We know where you work. We know your schedule. We know about the Thornfield Project." The Thornfield Project. That was the classified client system I'd been working on for the past month. It was a database management system for a private security company that handled background checks for government contractors. The project was under a non-disclosure agreement so strict that we weren't allowed to discuss it even with other employees at Mountain View Technologies. Someone had been monitoring my work, not just my personal life. I was still on the phone with 911 when Officer Patricia Santos arrived. She was an Oakwood PD patrol officer in her early 30s, driving a 2018 Ford Police Interceptor with the standard equipment. I showed her the notes and explained about the surveillance at my apartment. "Mr. Rodriguez, how many people know about this Thornfield project you mentioned?" "Maybe 6 people total. It's highly classified. We're not even supposed to acknowledge it exists." Officer Santos examined the photograph carefully. This was taken with professional equipment. The resolution and clarity suggest someone with serious surveillance gear, not a random stalker with a cell phone camera. She called for backup and requested that a unit check on the Ford Explorer at my apartment. While we waited, she asked me to think about anyone who might have a reason to want information about my work. "The Thornfield project involves background check databases," I explained. "If someone wanted to know how those checks are conducted, or if they wanted to identify vulnerabilities in the system, having access to our code would be extremely valuable." "Valuable to who?" criminal organizations trying to place people in sensitive positions, foreign governments wanting to compromise security clearances, anyone who needs to get past background check systems. Officer Santos' radio crackled. The backup unit had found the Ford Explorer abandoned in my apartment complex parking lot. The license plates were stolen, and there was no trace of the occupants. They knew we were coming, she said grimly. This is more sophisticated than typical stalking behavior. That's when I noticed the man in the baseball cap. He was standing near the Ferris wheel, about 50 yards away, holding a cell phone. He appeared to be having a conversation, but he kept glancing in our direction. When I pointed him out to Officer Santos, she started walking toward him. He immediately ended his call and began moving through the crowd, not running but walking with purpose toward the parking area. Officer Santos spoke into her radio, requesting assistance in detaining him for questioning. But by the time backup arrived, the man had disappeared. Over the next hour, Officer Santos and I discovered 2 more notes that had been placed around the carnival. One was taped inside the men's restroom. The Thornfield database has vulnerabilities. We need your help to fix them. The other was stuck to my windshield. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park. Come alone or your employer learns about your security breach. Security breach? I asked Officer Santos. What security breach? She looked at the note carefully. They're implying that you've already compromised the system somehow. Either that, or they're planning to make it look like you have. We went to the police station, where Detective William Chin took over the case. He explained that what I was experiencing looked like corporate espionage with a personal threat component. Someone wants access to the Thornfield project, Detective Chin said. They'd been studying your routine to find the best way to approach you. The carnival was probably chosen because it's a public space where they could observe your reactions to their messages. But why the psychological games? Why not just offer me money or threaten me directly? Because this way, they get information about your personality, your decision-making process, and your likely responses to different types of pressure. They're building a psychological profile to determine the most effective way to manipulate you. Detective Chin advised me not to go to Riverside Park the next morning. Instead, the police would set up surveillance to see who showed up. He also recommended that I contact my employer immediately to report the security concern. I called Janet Morrison at home that night. When I explained about the notes and the mention of Thornfield, there was a long silence. Marcus, she said finally, there is no Thornfield project. What do you mean? I've been working on it for a month. You've been working on a fabricated project. We created it as a security test after we suspected someone was trying to infiltrate our client systems. The classified database you've been building contains fake information designed to identify anyone who might be trying to steal our code. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For the past month, I'd been working on a fake project specifically designed to attract the attention of potential corporate spies. I was bait, and I didn't even know it. We've been monitoring all access to the fake Thornfield files, Janet continued. Someone has been attempting to hack into our systems for weeks, specifically targeting anything related to that project. When you started receiving surveillance, we knew they'd identified you as their target. The next morning, police surveillance at Riverside Park identified 3 individuals who showed up expecting to meet me. 2 were arrested immediately. The 3rd escaped but was identified through facial recognition software. The investigation revealed a network of corporate espionage specialists who had been targeting technology companies throughout the region. They specialized in identifying employees who worked on sensitive projects and using psychological pressure to turn them into informants. The photographs of me at my apartment, the detailed knowledge of my routine, the threatening notes, it was all designed to make me feel vulnerable and isolated, more likely to cooperate when they finally made their offer. But here's what still haunts me. During the investigation, police discovered that I wasn't their only target. They had files on 17 other technology workers in our area, including detailed surveillance logs and psychological profiles. Some of those workers had been receiving similar treatment for months without reporting it. The scariest part was learning how much information they'd gathered about all of us. Bank records, dating histories, family relationships, work schedules, even psychological assessments based on our social media activity. They knew which of us were likely to be motivated by money, which ones would respond to threats, and which ones could be manipulated through fear. I still work for Mountain View Technologies, but the experience changed how I think about privacy and security. Every time I'm in a public place, I wonder who might be watching and why. Every unexpected contact, every coincidental encounter, makes me question whether it's really random. Let me ask you something: have you ever felt like someone knew too much about your routine? Have you ever received messages that seemed too specific, too targeted to be random? Because what I learned is that we're all more visible than we think, and there are people who make a living by studying our patterns and exploiting our vulnerabilities. The corporate espionage ring was dismantled, but Detective Chin told me something that still keeps me awake at night. For every network we catch, he said, there are probably 3 more we don't know about. The technology exists to monitor anyone, anywhere, and the market for personal information is bigger than most people realize. What I didn't realize until weeks later was that the same techniques being used to target me had been used on other people in our area. People who had been approached at public events, followed to their homes, and psychologically manipulated by individuals who claimed to be law enforcement officers. The pattern was bigger than corporate espionage. It was part of something that connected back to those trafficking cases Detective Chin had been investigating. My name is David Thompson, and I'm a 31-year-old paramedic with Clearwater Emergency Services. I've responded to every kind of crisis you can imagine: overdoses, domestic violence, car accidents, and situations that would give most people nightmares for years. I thought I understood human behavior under extreme stress. But what happened to me at the Heritage County Fair on December 2nd, 2023, showed me that the most dangerous predators aren't always the ones you'd expect, and sometimes the people trying to help you are the ones you should fear most. I'd been working double shifts for the past 2 weeks, covering for my partner Jake Martinez, who was out with a back injury. The stress was getting to me: 14-hour days responding to calls that ranged from routine medical transport to life-or-death trauma situations. My supervisor, Captain Rebecca Foster, had insisted I take Saturday night off. "David, you're running on fumes," she'd said. "Go do something normal. Remember what it feels like to be around people who aren't bleeding or overdosing." The Heritage County Fair was about 20 minutes from my apartment on Hickory Lane in Clearwater. It was one of those traveling carnivals that moves from town to town, setting up in mall parking lots and fairgrounds. I wasn't particularly interested in carnival rides at 31, but they had local food vendors and a beer garden, and I figured it would be good to get out of my apartment for a few hours. I arrived around 8 p.m., just as the December cold was settling in and the carnival lights were creating that artificial warmth that makes everything look more inviting than it really is. The crowd was typical for a Saturday night: families with young children heading home, teenagers on dates, and adults like me who were looking for some mindless entertainment after a long week. I bought a beer and was walking toward the food trucks when she first approached me. She was maybe 45 years old, average height, with blonde hair that looked like it came from a bottle and makeup that had been applied too heavily. She was wearing a bright red coat that stood out in the crowd, and she had the kind of aggressive friendliness that immediately put me on edge. "Excuse me," she said, stepping directly into my path. "You look like someone who knows how to have fun. Want to ride the zipper with me?" The zipper was one of those carnival rides that flips you upside down in a metal cage while spinning you in multiple directions. It's the kind of ride that's fun when you're 15 and potentially lethal when the safety equipment hasn't been properly maintained. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said, trying to step around her. She moved to block me again. "Come on, don't be boring. It's Saturday night. Live a little." There was something about her insistence that felt wrong. In my line of work, you develop instincts about people who are trying too hard to get you to do something. Whether it's a patient lying about their symptoms or a family member hiding information about an overdose, aggressive persuasion usually means someone has an agenda. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm just here to relax," I said firmly. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Relax? On the zipper? That's the whole point. It's so intense you can't think about anything else. Trust me, it's exactly what you need. How do you know what I need? Because I can tell you're stressed. You have that look like you carry everyone else's problems. I'd bet you're in some kind of helping profession. Medical, maybe? Emergency services? Now I was genuinely concerned. That was too specific to be a lucky guess. Have we met before? Not exactly, she said, and her smile became predatory. But I know more about you than you might think. David Thompson, 31 years old, works for Clearwater Emergency Services. Lives alone on Hickory Lane. Drives a 2019 Subaru Outback, forest green. Every detail was accurate. I took a step back, my hand instinctively moving toward my phone. Who are you? Someone who's been waiting to meet you, she said. My name is Carol Hendricks, and I think we have some mutual friends. People who've been very interested in your work schedule and your off-duty activities. The name didn't mean anything to me, but the implication was clear. This wasn't a random encounter. Someone had sent her to find me, and they'd provided detailed information about my personal life. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but I was already planning my exit strategy. The parking lot was about 200 yards away, and there were enough people around that she probably wouldn't try anything violent in public. Oh, but you do, Carol said, moving closer. You've been working some very interesting calls lately. Overdoses that weren't really overdoses. Missing persons who were never really missing. Cases where you transported patients who disappeared from the hospital before they could be properly processed. She was referring to the Thornfield cases. Over the past 6 weeks, I'd responded to several calls that had seemed routine but turned out to be connected to Detective Chen's trafficking investigation. Young women found unconscious or disoriented, who claimed they'd been drugged and kidnapped. Most of them had been transported to hospitals, but several had disappeared from emergency rooms before police could interview them. I don't discuss my cases with strangers, I said. But you discuss them with someone, Carol replied. Someone who's been very interested in identifying the paramedics and hospital staff who might have noticed patterns. Someone who needs to know how much you remember about those particular patients. The implication was terrifying. She was suggesting that I'd been targeted because of my involvement in transporting trafficking victims. Someone wanted to know what I'd seen, what I remembered, and whether I posed a threat to their operation. The zipper is perfect for private conversations, Carol continued. 2 people locked in a cage, spinning around. Nobody can hear what you're saying over the noise and screaming. We could have a nice long talk about your experiences with those overdose calls. I'm leaving, I said, turning toward the parking lot. I wouldn't do that if I were you. She called after me. Your partner Jake Martinez is having a wonderful evening at his physical therapy appointment. Except his therapist isn't exactly who she claims to be. I stopped walking. Jake was at physical therapy for his back injury. He went to the same clinic every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evening. If someone wanted to get to him, that would be the perfect place. What do you want? I asked, turning back to face her. Just a conversation. On the zipper. Away from all these crowds and potential eavesdroppers. I pulled out my phone to call Jake, but Carol held up her hand. He's fine right now. But that could change very quickly if you don't cooperate. The carousel music and carnival noise suddenly felt menacing instead of festive. I was surrounded by hundreds of people, but none of them knew that I was being coerced by someone who was threatening my partner's safety. What kind of conversation? The kind where you tell me exactly what you remember about those overdose calls. What the patients said, what condition they were in, whether they mentioned any names or locations. Whether you shared any of that information with police or hospital staff. Carol started walking toward the zipper, clearly expecting me to follow. The ride was at the far end of the carnival, away from the main crowd and food vendors. If something went wrong, it would be harder for people to hear or intervene. As we walked, I tried to process what was happening. The trafficking network that Detective Chen had been investigating was apparently still operational, and they were systematically identifying everyone who might have information about their victims. Paramedics, hospital staff, police officers, anyone who might have noticed patterns or could identify members of the organization. How many others have you approached? I asked. You're not the first, Carol said. And you won't be the last. This is a very thorough organization, David. They don't leave loose ends. We reached the zipper, and Carol paid for 2 tickets from the teenage operator who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The ride consisted of a large rotating wheel with individual cages that spun independently as the wheel turned. When it was operating at full speed, riders were flipped upside down repeatedly while being spun in multiple directions. After you, Carol said, gesturing toward one of the cages. I looked around for security or police, but didn't see any. The nearest authority figure was probably the teenager operating the ride, who was clearly more interested in his phone than his job responsibilities. That's when I saw him. Marcus Rodriguez, the software engineer who'd been targeted by corporate espionage at the Oakwood Fall Festival 2 months earlier. He was standing near the ring toss game, about 50 feet away, talking on his phone. I'd met Marcus during Detective Chen's investigation. We'd discovered that our cases were connected. The same network that had been trying to extract information from him about security systems had also been monitoring paramedics and hospital staff who might have information about trafficking victims. Marcus saw me and immediately recognized that something was wrong. He ended his phone call and started walking in our direction. David? He called out. Everything okay? Carol's expression changed completely. The fake friendliness disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. Get in the cage, she hissed. Now. I don't think so, I said loudly, hoping to attract attention from other fairgoers. That's when Carol pulled out a small device that looked like a cell phone but was clearly something else. This sends a signal to my associates at Jake's physical therapy clinic. If I don't check in every 15 minutes, they interpret that as instructions to proceed with Plan B. Plan B? Jake has an unfortunate accident during his therapy session. Back injuries can be very dangerous if they're aggravated incorrectly. Marcus was getting closer, and I could see him talking on his phone again. Hopefully calling for help. The cage, David. We're running out of time. I climbed into the zipper cage, and Carol got in beside me. The teenage operator locked us in and started the ride without any safety instructions or checks. As we began to rotate, Carol moved closer to me. Here's what's going to happen, she said. You're going to tell me everything you remember about those overdose calls. Every detail, every name, every conversation. Then you're going to forget that this conversation ever happened. And if I don't? Then Jake's physical therapist discovers that his back injury is much more serious than originally diagnosed. Spinal injuries can be very unpredictable. The ride was picking up speed now, and we were starting to flip upside down with each rotation. Carol seemed completely unaffected by the motion, suggesting she'd done this before. This was her preferred method for conducting coercive interviews. The first call was November 8th. I said, hoping to buy time while Marcus and hopefully the police figured out how to help. Young woman, maybe 19, found unconscious behind the shopping center on Industrial Boulevard. What did she say when she regained consciousness? That she'd been drugged. She kept saying someone had put something in her drink at a party. What else? The ride was at full speed now, spinning us violently in multiple directions. Between the physical disorientation and the threat to Jake, I was having trouble thinking clearly. She mentioned a van. White van with Tennessee plates. Said someone had been following her for several days before the incident. Carol smiled. Good. What about the November 15th call? Different woman, same basic story. Found unconscious, claimed she'd been drugged and kidnapped. Did either of them mention specific names or locations? That's when I realized what was happening. Carol wasn't just gathering information about what the victims had told me, she was confirming which victims had provided information that could identify the trafficking network. The women who had mentioned specific details were the ones who would need to be silenced. They were both too disoriented to provide specific information. I lied. Carol studied my face carefully. I don't think you're being completely honest, David. The ride began to slow down, which meant our conversation was almost over. Whatever Carol was planning to do next, it would happen when we got off the zipper. As we came to a stop, I could see that the area around the ride had changed. Marcus was gone, but there were several people positioned around the zipper who hadn't been there before. They looked like carnival workers, but something about their positioning suggested they were there for a different purpose. Carol noticed them too. It seems your friend made some phone calls, she said. That's unfortunate for everyone involved. The teenage operator unlocked our cage, and Carol stepped out first. I followed, trying to identify the quickest route to safety. David Thompson? A woman in a windbreaker approached us. Detective Sarah Chin, Clearwater Police. I need to speak with you. Detective Chin. I'd heard Marcus mention her during the investigation. Carol's expression went from confident to panicked in an instant. Run, Carol whispered to me. If you stay here, they'll kill your partner. But instead of running, I grabbed Carol's arm. No, I said. This ends now. The next few minutes were chaos. Carol tried to escape, but the people positioned around the ride weren't carnival workers, they were undercover police officers. She was arrested along with 3 other individuals who had been conducting surveillance from different positions throughout the carnival. Detective Chen explained that they'd been tracking Carol Hendricks for weeks. She was a specialist in coercive interrogation who worked for the same trafficking network that had been exposed in Detective Chen's investigation. Her method was to identify potential witnesses, threaten people they cared about, and conduct intimidating interviews in isolated but public locations. The zipper was perfect for her, Detective Chen said. Loud enough that nobody could overhear the conversation, disorienting enough that victims couldn't think clearly, and public enough that it didn't look like a kidnapping. Jake was fine. The physical therapist who had been threatening him was actually another undercover police officer who had been monitoring the clinic after they learned it was being used as a location for threats. The investigation revealed that Carol had conducted similar interviews with at least 12 other people over the past 6 months. Hospital staff, emergency responders, social workers, and anyone else who might have information about trafficking victims. Several of them had provided information under duress that had led to victims being relocated or silenced before they could testify. But here's what shocked me most. During the interrogation, Carol revealed that the entire network, the corporate espionage targeting Marcus, the stalking incident at the carnival that had started this whole investigation, the threats against Detective Chin, and the coercive interviews were all coordinated by the same organization. It's not just human trafficking, Detective Chen explained to me later. It's a comprehensive criminal network that specializes in information gathering and elimination of witnesses. They target anyone who might threaten their operations, using different methods depending on the person's vulnerabilities. The network had been operating across multiple states, using traveling carnivals as mobile bases for surveillance and witness intimidation. The constant movement made it difficult for law enforcement to track their activities, and the carnival setting provided perfect cover for approaching targets in public places. Marcus Rodriguez had been targeted because his work on security systems could have exposed their methods for placing people in sensitive positions. Detective Chen had been targeted because her investigation was getting too close to their trafficking operation. I'd been targeted because the overdose victims I transported had provided information that could identify network members. The scariest part, Detective Chen told me, is how systematic they were. They had detailed files on hundreds of people across 5 states. Everyone who might pose a threat was cataloged, profiled, and scheduled for elimination or neutralization. The arrests at the carnival led to the dismantling of the entire network. 47 people were arrested across multiple states, including corrupt law enforcement officers, medical professionals, and corporate executives who had been facilitating various aspects of the operation. 26 trafficking victims were rescued from locations across the region. Several of them were the women I transported as overdose victims. They'd been recaptured after escaping and were being held at rural properties while the network decided how to handle them permanently. I still work as a paramedic, but the experience changed how I see my job. Every call now makes me wonder if I'm seeing something that's part of a larger pattern. Every patient who seems disoriented or frightened makes me question whether they're a victim of something bigger than the immediate medical emergency. The network is gone, but Detective Chen warned me that others probably exist. Criminal organizations learn from each other, she said. The methods that Carol used, the surveillance techniques, the psychological pressure, other groups will adapt and improve on them. Let me ask you something that I think about every day now. How well do you really know the people around you? When someone approaches you in a public place, when someone knows too much about your routine, when someone tries to pressure you into doing something that feels wrong, do you trust your instincts? Or do you convince yourself that you're being paranoid? Because what I learned is that predators don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like friendly strangers at a carnival, offering to share a ride and have a conversation. Sometimes they wear uniforms and carry badges. Sometimes they're the people we work with every day, the ones we trust with our safety and our secrets. The most dangerous people are often the ones who seem the most helpful, the most understanding, the most willing to listen to your problems and offer solutions. Because they're not trying to help you, they're gathering information to use against you, or against the people you care about. That night at the Heritage County Fair was the end of a network that had been operating for years, destroying lives and silencing witnesses across multiple states. But it was also a reminder that evil doesn't announce itself with dramatic music and obvious warning signs. It approaches with a smile, offers you something you think you want, and only reveals its true nature when you're already trapped in the cage. The ride is over now, but I'll never forget the lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous place you can be is exactly where someone else wants you to go. Collection complete. Personal Safety Horror Stories. 4 interconnected true stories revealing how a sophisticated criminal network used different psychological tactics to target, manipulate, and silence potential witnesses across multiple communities. From carnival stalking to police corruption, from corporate espionage to coercive interrogation, these accounts show how ordinary people became unwitting targets of an organization that specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The network is dismantled, the victims are rescued, and justice has been served. But the methods they used, the vulnerabilities they exploited, and the reminder that predators often hide behind masks of authority and helpfulness, those lessons remain as relevant as ever. Stay aware. Trust your instincts. And remember that sometimes the person offering to help you onto the ride is the last person you should trust with your safety. My name is Rachel Sullivan, and I'm a 43-year-old social worker with the Meadowbrook County Department of Children and Family Services. I've been investigating child welfare cases for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. Abuse disguised as discipline, neglect hidden behind financial struggles, and dysfunction masked by suburban respectability. But what I discovered about the Whitmore family at the Pine Valley Carnival on January 20th, 2024, showed me that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who work hardest to appear perfect. The Whitmore family had been on my radar for exactly 3 months, ever since their neighbor Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez called our hotline with concerns about unusual activity at their house on Sycamore Drive. Not the typical complaints we get: no screaming, no obvious signs of abuse, no children showing up to school with suspicious injuries. Instead, Mrs. Vasquez reported seeing children who didn't seem to belong to the family coming and going at odd hours, and hearing what sounded like organized activities in the basement during school hours. "It's probably nothing," Mrs. Vasquez had said during our initial interview. "But the Whitmores have 2 children, and I've seen at least 6 different kids going in and out of that house over the past month. And they're always so quiet. Like they're scared to make noise." I'd driven by the Whitmore house several times, but everything appeared normal. Well-maintained 2-story colonial, landscaped yard, family minivan in the driveway. Robert Whitmore worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, and his wife Linda was a substitute teacher. Their children, Michael and Emma, were 8 and 10 years old respectively, both honor students with no disciplinary issues. The family had no history with our department, no criminal background, and no red flags in any of our systems. But Mrs. Vasquez's concerns were specific enough that I couldn't dismiss them entirely. That's why I was at the Pine Valley Carnival on a cold January evening, conducting what we call environmental observation, watching the family interact in a public setting to assess their dynamics and behavior patterns. The Whitmores were impossible to miss. They'd been at the carnival for 2 hours, and they were dominating every competition. Ring toss, basketball shootout, hammer strength test, duck pond, they were winning everything. But it wasn't just their success that caught my attention, it was how they were winning. Robert Whitmore was coaching his children through each game with military precision. Before approaching the ring toss, I watched him spend 5 minutes analyzing the bottles, measuring distances, and explaining trajectory calculations to Michael and Emma. At the basketball shootout, he demonstrated proper shooting form and had the kids practice their stance repeatedly before they started playing. Aim for the back rim, he instructed 10-year-old Emma. Arc your shot exactly 37 degrees. Follow through with your wrist. Emma made 9 shots out of 10. The carnival worker operating the booth looked genuinely shocked. Wow, young lady, he said. You're better than most adults. You play on a team? She practices, Robert answered before Emma could speak. We believe in preparation and excellence. I moved closer to observe their interaction. Linda Whitmore was carrying a large canvas bag filled with prizes they'd won: stuffed animals, toy cars, candy, and several items that looked expensive enough to be significant wins. She was also carrying a tablet and what appeared to be a detailed notebook. Next is the hammer strength test, Linda announced, consulting her notes. Then the duck pond, then the ring toss rematch at 8:15. They had a schedule. A detailed, written plan for conquering every game at the carnival. But what really caught my attention was the children's behavior. Michael and Emma were polite, focused, and incredibly well behaved. They didn't ask for snacks, didn't complain about the cold, and didn't show any of the normal excitement or spontaneity you'd expect from kids at a carnival. Instead, they moved through the activities with the mechanical precision of children who had been extensively trained. Michael, Robert called out as they approached the hammer strength test. What do we remember about leverage and momentum? Plant your feet shoulder-width apart, use your core muscles, and follow through with your entire body. The 8-year-old recited. Maximum force at the moment of impact. Michael picked up the hammer, which was almost as tall as he was, and struck the target with enough force to ring the bell. The carnival worker stared in amazement. Son, that's incredible! Most grown men can't ring that bell. Again, Robert answered for his child. He's been practicing. We believe in developing skills through repetition and analysis. I was starting to understand why Mrs. Vasquez had been concerned. There was something unsettling about the family's behavior, though I couldn't identify exactly what it was. They weren't doing anything wrong, they were just too good at everything, too prepared, too controlled. As they moved to the duck pond game, I noticed Linda checking her tablet and making notes. She was recording something about each game: times, scores, techniques, or strategies. The level of documentation was far beyond what any normal family would do for a night at the carnival. Emma, Linda said, remember what happened at the Riverside County Fair last month? The duck pond operator there had modified the game to make it more difficult. What adjustments did we make? We compensated for the current by aiming upstream, Emma replied. And we selected ducks based on their position in the water flow pattern. They'd been doing this at other carnivals. This wasn't a spontaneous family outing, it was part of a systematic campaign to win prizes at multiple venues. I watched Emma successfully navigate the duck pond game, selecting winning ducks with an accuracy that defied probability. The carnival worker was so impressed that he offered her a job when she turned 18. That's when I realized what was bothering me. The children weren't enjoying themselves. Despite winning every game and accumulating an impressive collection of prizes, Michael and Emma showed no excitement, no joy, no sense of accomplishment. They were going through the motions of having fun, but their expressions were blank, almost robotic. "Excellent work," Robert told them after Emma's duck pond victory. "Now we move to Phase 2. "Phase 2? I moved closer, pretending to be interested in the nearby cotton candy stand. Linda consulted her tablet again. Ring toss, basketball rematch, and the strength test verification. We need to establish patterns for the February schedule. What about the new targets?" Robert asked quietly. "I've identified 3 possibilities," Linda replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "The Morrison family from Willowbrook, the Johnsons from Cedar Falls, and the Stevens family from Lakeside. All fit the profile." Profile? I was no longer observing a family enjoying an evening at the carnival. I was watching something that looked like a business operation, complete with targets, schedules, and systematic planning. I decided to approach them directly. Sometimes the best way to assess a family's dynamics is to observe how they interact with strangers, especially authority figures. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to the family. "I couldn't help but notice how talented your children are. They're incredible at these games." Robert and Linda exchanged a quick glance that I almost missed. "Thank you," Robert said carefully. "They work very hard to develop their skills." "I'm Rachel Sullivan," I continued. "I work with families in the area. Are you folks from around here?" "We travel quite a bit," Linda answered vaguely. "We enjoy experiencing different communities and their local events." "That's wonderful. And you're remarkably successful at these games. I bet you've won hundreds of prizes over the years." Another glance between the parents. "We've been fortunate," Robert said. I knelt down to talk to the children directly. "Michael, Emma, what's your favorite part about coming to carnivals?" The children looked at their parents before answering, waiting for permission to speak. "We like winning," Emma said finally. "And helping our family." "Helping your family do what?" "Collect items for the other children," Michael added. "What other children?" Robert stepped forward. "We donate our prizes to various charities. Homeless shelters, foster care programs, that sort of thing." But something about his explanation didn't ring true. The prizes they were carrying weren't the typical stuffed animals and plastic toys that get donated to charity. They were high-value items, electronics, gift cards, and merchandise that would be worth significant money if sold. "That's very generous," I said. "Which organizations do you work with?" "Several different ones," Linda answered quickly. "We prefer to spread our contributions around." I decided to test their story. "I work with children and family services. We're always looking for donations for our foster care programs. Perhaps we could coordinate something?" The parents' discomfort was now obvious. Robert's jaw tightened, and Linda's grip on her tablet became noticeably tighter. "We'll have to check our schedule," Robert said. "We have commitments to other organizations." "Of course. Could I get your contact information? I'd love to learn more about your charitable work." "We prefer to keep our giving private," Linda said. "But thank you for your interest." They were clearly trying to end the conversation, but I pressed a little further. "What area do you live in? I might know some families who could benefit from your donations." "We move around quite a bit," Robert said. "Now if you'll excuse us, we have a schedule to keep." As they walked away, I heard Linda whisper something to Robert that made my blood run cold. "She's asking too many questions. We might need to accelerate the timeline." "Accelerate what timeline? And why would my questions about their charitable work be a problem?" I followed them at a distance, watching as they continued their systematic conquest of the carnival games. But now I was paying attention to different details. The way they positioned themselves to observe other families with children. The way Linda made notes about families who were struggling with the games or seemed to be having financial difficulties. The way Robert engaged other parents in conversations about their children's activities and schedules. They weren't just winning prizes. They were gathering information about other families. I watched Robert approach a couple whose children were crying because they couldn't win anything at the ring toss. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help but notice you're having some trouble." Mind if I give your kids a few tips? Within 10 minutes, Robert had not only helped the children win several prizes, but he'd also learned their names, their school, their address, and their parents' work schedules. He was so charming and helpful that the parents were practically giving him their life stories. "You're so good with children," the mother gushed. "Do you work with kids professionally?" "In a way," Robert smiled. "My wife and I run programs for families in the area. We're always looking for children who might benefit from our services." That's when I realized what I was witnessing. The Whitmore family wasn't just winning carnival games, they were using their success to identify and target vulnerable families. Their systematic approach to the games, their detailed documentation, their questions about other families, it was all part of a recruitment strategy. I immediately called Detective Chun on her direct line. "Sarah, this is Rachel Sullivan from Child Services. I need backup at the Pine Valley Carnival. I think I've found something connected to your trafficking investigation." "The Whitmore family?" Detective Chun asked. "We've been tracking them for 6 weeks. You know about them? They're part of the network we've been investigating. They specialize in identifying families with children who might be vulnerable to recruitment. They use their success at carnival games to build trust and gather information." "Recruitment for what?" "The same trafficking operation that targeted Marcus Rodriguez and David Thompson. But instead of focusing on adults who might be witnesses, the Whitmores identify children who could be groomed for various purposes. Families with financial problems, single parents who work multiple jobs, kids who don't have strong supervision." Detective Chen explained that the Whitmore family had been traveling to carnivals across 5 states, using their game-winning abilities to attract attention and build credibility with other families. They would identify children who fit certain criteria, isolated, unsupervised, or from families facing economic hardship, and then gradually build relationships with the parents. They present themselves as a successful, stable family who wants to help, Detective Chen said. They offer tutoring, mentoring, or childcare services. Sometimes they invite children to stay with them for weekends or longer periods, claiming it's part of a youth development program. And the parents go along with this? When you're working 2 jobs and struggling to pay rent, free childcare from a family that seems responsible and caring can feel like a blessing. Especially when that family has demonstrated their success and stability by winning prizes and showing how well behaved their own children are. The pieces were falling into place. The Whitmore children weren't just trained to win carnival games, they were trained to be recruitment tools. Their robotic behavior, their perfect obedience, their lack of natural childhood enthusiasm, it was all designed to make them appear like ideal children that other parents would want their kids to emulate. "Where are they now?" Detective Chen asked. I looked around the carnival. The Whitmore family had disappeared. "They're gone. They must have realized I was too interested in their activities. We have units positioned around the carnival. They won't get far." 20 minutes later, the Whitmore family was arrested in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center. They had been loading their van with the prizes they'd won, along with detailed files on 17 families they'd observed at various carnivals over the past 3 months. The investigation revealed that Robert and Linda Whitmore had been operating their recruitment scheme for over 2 years. They had perfected their carnival game techniques through months of practice, turning their children into unwilling accomplices in an operation that had successfully recruited dozens of children from families across multiple states. Michael and Emma Whitmore weren't just trained to win games, they were trained to be living advertisements for their parents' supposed parenting skills. Their perfect behavior, their impressive abilities, and their polite demeanor were all designed to make other parents think, "I wish my children were like them." The saddest part, Detective Chen told me later, is that Michael and Emma were victims too. They'd been conditioned to perform their roles perfectly, but they had no understanding of what their parents were really doing. They thought they were helping other children by bringing them into their families' programs. The Whitmore family's arrest led to the rescue of 23 children who had been placed in various locations across the trafficking network. Some had been gone for months, others for over a year. Their parents had been told they were participating in youth development programs or educational opportunities. But here's what haunts me most about the case. The Whitmores had been incredibly successful because they exploited every parent's desire to do what's best for their children. When a family that appears perfect offers to help your struggling child, when they demonstrate their success and stability through public achievements, when they present themselves as a resource for families who need support, it's natural to want to trust them. The carnival games weren't just entertainment for the Whitmores. They were job interviews. Every prize they won was a credential that demonstrated their capability and success. Every perfect performance by their children was a testimonial to their parenting skills. Every interaction with other families was an opportunity to assess vulnerability and identify potential targets. I still attend carnivals in my area, but now I watch for different things. Families that seem too perfect, children who are too well behaved, parents who ask too many questions about other families' situations. Because I learned that predators don't always lurk in shadows, sometimes they stand in the brightest lights, winning prizes and collecting admiration. The Whitmore network was dismantled, but Detective Chen warned me that similar operations probably exist in other regions. The techniques they used building credibility through public success, using children as recruitment tools, exploiting parents' desire to help their kids, these methods are too effective to disappear completely. Let me ask you something that keeps me awake at night. When someone appears to have perfect children, when they seem to have all the answers about parenting and success, when they offer to help your family in ways that seem too good to be true, do you ask yourself why they're really interested in your children? Do you wonder what they're getting out of their apparent generosity? Because what I learned from the Whitmore case is that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who work hardest to appear like ideal parents, perfect families, and generous community members. They don't snatch children from playgrounds, they convince parents to hand their children over willingly, with gratitude and relief. The perfect family at the carnival, winning every game and collecting every prize, might not be celebrating their success. They might be building a resume for their next victim. 5-story collection complete. Personal safety horror stories. 5 interconnected true stories revealing how a sophisticated criminal network operated across multiple states, using different psychological tactics and recruitment methods to traffic human beings and silence potential witnesses. From carnival stalking to police corruption, from corporate espionage to coercive interrogation, from family-based recruitment to systematic exploitation, these accounts show how predators adapt their methods to exploit every vulnerability in our society. The network has been dismantled, the victims rescued, and justice served. But the methods they used, the masks they wore, the trust they exploited, and the vulnerabilities they identified remain as relevant reminders of how evil adapts to hide in plain sight. Stay vigilant. Trust your instincts. And remember that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who work hardest to appear trustworthy, successful, and helpful. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.